You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans. Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk. And at the end of this show, you're going to get the interview that I did with Paul Knepper, the author of the book about the 90s Knicks. I had a good time talking to him. I really, really did, even though I hate the Knicks with a burning passion. But I have to start by recapping the 4 MLB games that happened yesterday. I'll go chronologically, so I'll start with Marlins Braves. And I don't want to say that your heart has to break for Yimi Garcia, because that's not 100% accurate, but you have to feel a little bad for him. If you're not a Braves fan, you know, this is a guy who had a really good season for the Marlins. Went 3-0 with an 0.6 ERA. He was formerly with the Dodgers. They let him walk. He has to go to the Marlins, so he's thinking, oh, darn it, I'm not going to get a chance to win a World Series. And now, you know what? Both the Dodgers and Marlins are in the playoffs. So it all worked out in the end for him, I guess. I mean, Garcia's a solid pitcher. He's always been solid. Never great, never terrible. He just could not get that slider working. He kept hanging breaking balls. I mean, they were right out in the middle of the plate. Of course the Braves are gonna feast on those. I mean, he was good with his fastball. He just kept hanging breaking balls. Don't get on James Hoyt for giving up the Swanson home run. He just made one bad pitch. Garcia made a bunch of really bad pitches. Tough loss for the Marlins. They had a real chance to win that game yesterday. They're up 4-3 entering the bottom of the 7th. All they need is the bullpen to hold it down, and the bullpen lays an egg. Garcia did his best J-Happ impression. Or no, I take that back. Happ did his best Garcia impression, because Happ came later. Before I get into that horror show, I'll talk a little bit about Astros athletics. It came out that Greinke's arm is a little sore, so that's why he didn't start yesterday, and he's not going to start today. I guess it's possible he could start tomorrow, but I don't know for sure. This was a typical Sean Mania game. He is a guy who's going to give up 4 runs. That didn't surprise me. What surprised me was Framber Valdez, looking like the second coming of Justin Verlander. 7 innings of 2-run ball. He kept his pitch count down. Really, really effective. He only made 2 bad pitches the whole game. The home runs to Davis and Pinder. That was it. And it was funny, Bob Melvin got some heat for starting Pinder, putting him third in the lineup. He's not Matt Chapman, but Pinder did his job. But at the end of the day, they couldn't hit Valdez. And George Springer coming through with a big game, 2 homers, 3 RBIs. What did I tell you before this series? The Astros just have too much firepower. You're seeing it here. The Athletics made Altuve a non-factor. They made Bregman a non-factor. They made Correa a non-factor. They couldn't do it with Springer. From the top down, this team is just better than the Athletics. Okay. Now it's time to talk about Yankees-Rays. I got on Boone for his decision to start Davy Garcia yesterday. I didn't think it was going to work. I thought you had to go to Tanaka. You know, this idea that you can throw away playoff games. Whatever happens in Game 2 is going to happen. We'll get them the next game. That doesn't hold any water to me. At the end of the day, a win yesterday looks the same as a win today. And Garcia didn't look great in the first inning. He gave up a home run to Randy Arozarena. I understand that Arozarena has had a great playoffs. He killed the Blue Jays. He's killing the Yankees. I'm not begrudging Garcia for giving up that home run. But it wasn't a great inning. A great inning is a 1-2-3 inning. Evidently, the plan was for Happ to come in early. You force the Rays into starting a lefty-heavy lineup. Then you bring in the lefty Happ as the guy who's going to get the bulk of the innings. Here's the problem with that incredibly stupid plan. There are a bunch of problems. Here's the biggest one. Bullpen games don't work in the playoffs. Especially a Yankees bullpen without Green and Britton. You're going to Jonathan Loaisiga in high leverage spots. Johnny freaking Lasagna. The guy's not that good. I mean, now you're in a situation where Jordan Montgomery has to start Game 4. How are you going to start Garcia in Game 4? The kid probably has no confidence. And even then, if you start Garcia, what's to stop you from going to Montgomery immediately? And now you're going to start Cole on short rest in a possible Game 5. Why were the Yankees so cute in this game? You're the freaking Yankees! You're going with a freaking opener in the playoffs when you have a choice? Are you joking? I cannot believe that disaster that I saw yesterday. I don't know who is to blame. Boone, Cashman, the analytic people in the organization, a combination, whoever, it doesn't matter. Start Tanaka in Game 2. It's really simple, okay? This is how you manage a playoff series, okay? Every aspiring manager, take notes. Your best pitcher starts Game 1. Your second best starter starts Game 2. Your third best starter, he starts Game 3. Your fourth best starter, he starts game 4. Game 5 in this topsy-turvy year, yeah, you have to go to someone on short rest if you don't have a fifth starter that you're confident in. I get that. Usually you don't have to, but whatever. It's 2020. Nowhere in that plan does it say you use an opener. Openers do not work in the playoffs. There are too many variables. You're relying on every single pitcher coming out of that bullpen to be effective. The Yankees trotted out 5 guys out of that bullpen. Happ, Ottavino, Loaisiga, Holder, and Nelson. How many of them do you think didn't give up a run? The answer is 2. Holder and Nelson. Happ got creamed. Ottavino didn't look good. He is not a good playoff pitcher, I'll tell you that. Now I'm starting to understand the hesitance in going to him. You should be able to, but this guy just can't get it done in the playoffs. Loaisiga shouldn't be used in high-leverage situations. Okay, he just shouldn't. I mean, again, whoever came up with this idea needs to get a brain scan. I don't know if this was Boone. I really don't. The one thing I'll say is, he executed it. At the end of the day, he's the manager. He's the guy going out there making the changes. You think Brian Cashman is pulling a Brody Van Wagenen and calling down into the dugout to say, you have to pull this guy now? That's not what's happening. Maybe Boone got talked into using an opener, but after that, it was all Boone. He chose when to pull Garcia. He chose when to put in Ottavino. He chose when to put in Loaisiga. If the Yankees lose this series, Aaron Boone needs to be held accountable. I'm not saying fire him. I don't think that's fair. But he has to enter next season on the hot seat. Because this guy has proven that he cannot manage in the playoffs. And I gotta tell you, I feel bad for J. Happ. I don't like Happ that much. But he was the Yankees' third best starter this year. He intimated afterwards that he really didn't want to be used as a, follower. He wanted to come out and start the game. I don't blame him at all. He went along with it. He kind of had to. Didn't have much of a choice. But Jay, I don't blame you for being upset. You never should have been in this situation. Just because you're a good starter doesn't mean that you're going to be good coming out of the bullpen. Starting pitchers are creatures of habit. Once you mess with that regimen, you're just asking for trouble. There was literally no good reason for Garcia to have opened that game. I mean, think about this. Instead of starting Masahiro Tanaka yesterday, a guy who I guarantee you would have pitched better than Tyler Glasnow. Glasnow did not pitch that great. He gave up 4 runs. 10 strikeouts, but 4 runs. Giancarlo Stanton is feasting in these playoffs. Gotta love it. I guarantee you Tanaka would have pitched better than that. And then maybe you can go to Garcia. Then you can go to Ottavino. If you start Tanaka and then Ottavino lays an egg, the issue isn't Boone's mismanagement. The issue is Ottavino cannot pitch in the playoffs. There are too many variables for an opener to work. You want to tell me that it works in the regular season sometimes? So why can't it work in the playoffs? If you don't see the difference between regular season baseball and playoff baseball, I can't help you. Playoff baseball is designed for your best players to show out. I understand this year it's a little more difficult. No off days. And in a weird way, I don't even mind the idea of an opener or a piggyback for Cole. If you don't think he's going to be that effective on 3 days rest, then shorten his outing. I can see the logic behind that. But here's the biggest thing with the opener. If you see the opener pitching well, ride him. Garcia made one bad pitch to a guy who's killing the league right now. This could have all been avoided. Garcia just starts the second. If Garcia starts to falter, put in Happ. No one begrudges you. You pulled Garcia way too early. Give him some run, for God's sake. You're saying you don't trust him. You have shot this kid's confidence. Either go to him for game 2 and tell him that you have faith in him to go 6 innings, which I didn't, but he could have proved me wrong. Stranger things have happened. Or don't go to him at all. It's the playoffs. It's the freaking playoffs. There's no need to get cute. If the Yankees don't win tonight, they're in trouble. And I'm going to a Rays fan's house tonight to watch the game. My best friend Mark, big Rays fan. I know exactly what he's going to say. First thing I see him, what on earth was Boone thinking? I'll have to throw my hands up. He'll say, that's your manager? He's right. He'll be right. He'll be 100% right. One other thing about that game that deserves mentioning, the absolutely terrible umpiring of C.B. Buckner. C.B. Buckner is without question the worst umpire in the majors. It is not Angel Hernandez. It is not Laz Diaz. It is not Joe West. It is C.B. Buckner. And it's been this way for years. I don't know how he got this assignment. I don't know how he still has a job. You could have put Mr. Magoo behind the plate, and he would have done a better job calling balls and strikes than Buckner did. The rest of the baseball world saw his ineptitude. I knew about it from before the first pitch was thrown. This guy is inept. This guy is a moron. This guy needs to go. There is literally no good reason for him to be a major league umpire. He has proven that he cannot do it. It's bad enough if you're going to make him a major league umpire, but you put him in the playoffs? The playoffs? That was the best argument for a robot calling balls and strikes than I've ever seen. After that horror show, I wouldn't be opposed to it. What an absolute disgrace Buckner is. If he has any class, he'll retire. Moving on now to Padres-Dodgers. And I hope that Boone got home in time to watch Dave Roberts and what he did with his bullpen. Because that's how you manage a game. Walker Buehler didn't have his best stuff. So he puts in Dustin May, and May looked electric. He pulled May after 2 innings. I didn't mind that decision at all. You've got to save him for later in the series. I wouldn't have been upset if May went back out there, but 2 innings is fine. And then Victor Gonzalez, Blake Trinan, and Kenley Jansen shut the door. I mean, this was another case of a bullpen game not working. I understand that this game wasn't supposed to be a bullpen game. I'm talking about the Padres side of it. Mike Clevenger got the start. You could tell he wasn't 100%. He didn't have his best stuff. He walked 3 Dodgers. And he had to be pulled before recording an out in the 2nd inning. And after that, Jace Tingler was forced to go to the bullpen for 24 outs. That's not going to work. It's very rare that you get a situation where, Luis Severino is ineffective, so the bullpen can get 26 outs. Or whatever it was in that wild card game that he started against the Twins. I think it was a third of an inning. Thank you, D.D. Gregorius. You can't begrudge Tingler for the way he managed this game, but you have to begrudge him for barking at Lance Barrett. Now, I understand that Barrett didn't do a great job yesterday. He wasn't as bad as C.B. Buckner. No one's as bad as C.B. Buckner. But Barrett wasn't great. And Tingler was giving it to him hard. I mean, you could tell he was dropping F-bombs. He was swearing like a sailor. Usually I would say, let it go. It's emotional. It's the playoffs. Tingler just saw his best starter leave with an injury. But he was asking to be thrown out. I don't begrudge Barrett for throwing Tingler out. I really don't. He didn't have much of a choice. But the big story is the Clevenger injury. Should he have been out there in the first place? He was probably angling to start. And you kind of have to give him the ball in that spot. But having said that, you also need to be able to put his well-being first. I mean, Tingler is in a no-win situation there. If he starts Clevenger and his arm falls off, why did you start him? If Clevenger doesn't start, and whoever was the next choice to start Game 1 lays an egg, why didn't you start Clevenger? I don't blame Tingler for anything he did yesterday. You want to tell me he shouldn't have been that hard on Barrett? You can tell me that, but his emotions were running high. I don't blame him for getting upset. Having said that, though, again, I don't blame Barrett for tossing him at all. Tingler was incredibly hard on Barrett. He didn't have much of a choice. But now it's time to preview today's 4 games. I'll start with Marlins Braves, Pablo Lopez versus Ian Anderson. Lopez is a traditional pitcher. He likes to establish his fastball, and then he'll get you with his off-speed stuff, his changeup, and his sinker. He does a good job of throwing them out of the zone. He does a good job of making players chase those pitches. If you're not going to strike out because of those pitches, you're going to hit it in the ground. He's very good at inducing ground balls. He's a solid pitcher. He had a good year for the Marlins. Went 6-4 with a 3.61 ERA. The future is pretty bright for him, but the future is brighter for Ian Anderson. A consensus top 50 prospect before the season. Has great stuff. Really good four-seamer, really good changeup, really good curve. One thing I'd like to see from him a little bit more is him attacking the inside and outside part of the plate. He tends to go either high or low, not side to side. It was kind of weird. When I was watching the Yankee game yesterday, I didn't notice too many pitchers attacking the inside part of the plate. Very weird. But the future is incredibly bright for Anderson. The future's bright for Lopez too, but Anderson is the hotter prospect. I think it's fair to say that he has the edge in this matchup. When you look at Athletics Astros, that's going to be Jesus Luzardo versus Jose Urquidy. Luzardo missed a season with Tommy John surgery, but he's rebounded from that and has shown why he is such a highly regarded prospect. Went 3-2 with a 4.12 ERA. He's going to be around for a long time. He's a really good lefty starter. Lefties last in this league. And he's an interesting pitcher. He has 4 pitches that he throws almost equally. A four-seamer, a changeup, a curve, and a sinker. He likes to use the curve as his chase pitch. Against lefties, it's lethal, because it breaks down and inside. That's impossible for lefties to do anything with. Against righties, he'll use the sinker a little bit more. He's able to alter his approach based on the hitter. He's a very smart pitcher. I like Luzardo a lot. I think he has a very bright future in this league. As for Jose Urquidy, you really only have to worry about the fastball with him. He has off-speed pitches, obviously, but none are as good as his fastball. That's the pitch he trusts the most. And it's not an overpowering fastball or anything. It's lucky to hit 95 on the gun, but he locates it really well. He pitches to contact a lot, which can come back and bite you, but against this Athletics lineup, I don't have a problem with that. I think the Athletics have the edge in this pitching matchup, but it wouldn't surprise me if the Astros found a way to win this game. Again, they are just light years better than the Athletics. Moving on now to Rays Yankees. I'm not going to spend too much time on Tanaka. I went into him yesterday, went into him today. We all know the pitcher he is. Proven playoff performer, doesn't let the bright lights faze him. I understand he didn't look that great in Game 2 against the Indians, but I don't think he's going to lay an egg again. But Charlie Morton's another proven playoff pitcher. He killed the Yankees in Game 7 of 2017. Him and McCullers. He has a curve that's lethal against righties. Coming in, forget about it. and lefties, he can get him flailing. Four-seamer, he attacks high in the zone. His sinker, he has a tendency to hang, but if he gets it working, it's unhittable. It's kind of funny. Morton used to be a very sinker-heavy pitcher. He's backed off that in recent years. This is going to be a good matchup between two proven postseason pitchers. Moving on now to Padres-Dodgers. We don't know who's going to start this game for the Padres. For the Dodgers, it's going to be Clayton Kershaw. Kershaw has a tendency to fall apart in the playoffs, but he didn't do it against the Brewers. So I think it's a fair bet to say that he won't do it against the Padres. Is it possible he could do it? Yeah. But I don't think he will. Kershaw's stuff is just so lethal. A fastball with incredible movement. A curve that falls through the center of the zone. A slider that tails away from righties. When he's on, he's unhittable. He's a future Hall of Famer. It's just that simple. Moving on now to Game 4 of the NBA Finals. The Lakers are now 1 game away from winning another championship. The one thing I'll say is, I don't think the Heat played bad in this game. I like how they played defense. They were bullying the Lakers inside. Davis and LeBron were getting theirs. Give them full credit. But a guy like Rondo was dreadful. He only hit 1 layup. That was it. And even then, the 8 field goals that Davis and LeBron hit, 2 of them came from beyond the arc. So let's focus on the 6 that didn't. They had to work to get those in. I mean, those were just good shots. You know, we live in an era where it's not enough to play great defense. I can't tell you how many times I've seen these great players like Durant, Giannis, LeBron, Luka, Kawhi, whoever, have a possession where they have great defense played on them by whoever, it doesn't matter. And they still find a way to get the shot to fall. In the old days, it didn't used to be like that. Obviously, there were still guys who were capable of doing incredible things, but the players today are more offensively gifted than the players of yesteryear. I really don't think the Heat have anything to be ashamed of here. They just miss Goran Dragic. And at the end of the day, there's only so much that you're going to be able to do without him. Kendrick Nunn played 25 minutes. He was dreadful. He shot 2 for 11 from the field. This is a guy who I thought should have been getting more minutes when the playoffs started. Now I understand why he wasn't getting those minutes. He is getting fazed by the bright lights. And it's a shame because I like Nunn. Undrafted free agent. Carves out a role with the Heat. Rookie of the Year finalist. I like him. He just doesn't seem to have that clutch gene yet. Can he develop it? It's hard, but as you spend more time in the league, you get less fazed by the bright lights. But that's usually something you're born with. That's why it's called a gene, after all. Look, you'd be a fool to count the Heat out. We've seen teams blow 3-1 series leads before. LeBron knows it better than anyone. He came back from a 3-1 deficit. The Nuggets came back from 2 3-1 series deficits in the bubble. The series isn't over, but it's looking really good for the Lakers. It seems like Anthony Davis is going to win Finals MVP. And good for him. He'll deserve it. I don't want to hear that that's a black mark on LeBron, though. What does that have to do with anything, him not winning Finals MVP? He has 3 Finals MVPs. What's the difference between 3 Finals MVPs and 4 Finals MVPs? Not much. So let me get this straight. The fact that Dwayne Wade only has 1 Finals MVP, that's a bad thing? The fact that Chris Bosh has none, that's a bad thing? We need to take away their rings? You've got to be kidding me. Yeah, Stephen Curry never won an NBA title. The freaking LeBron haters, man, you gotta love it. They witness greatness day after day when he's on the court, and they just can't appreciate it. I don't get it. There are a couple NFL stories that I want to talk about. The first one concerns the Washington football team benching Dwayne Haskins for Kyle Allen. In fact, Haskins has been demoted to 3rd string in favor of Alex Smith. So the depth chart in DC is now Allen, Smith, Haskins. Firstly, great job by Alex Smith in working back from his career, if not life-threatening, injuries. He deserves all the credit in the world. And if nothing else, he should get a chance late in a game to have one last moment in the sun. If you really don't want him starting because you're concerned his leg is going to fall off, what I wouldn't mind doing is putting him in late in a game when it's a blowout. And you can telegraph it to the defense. You can say to them, hey, we just want Smith to have one last completion. Let him throw this short out route, and then that'll be it. I'm sure they'd go along with that. It's an incredible story. But back to Haskins for Allen. I still have faith in Haskins to turn his career around. At the end of the day, he doesn't have much to work with. Outside of Terry McLaurin and Antonio Gibson, there's no skill position player that scares me for Washington. And even then, how much does Gibson scare you? I think he's going to have a good career. He's had a good first quarter of the season, but I think it's a fair bet to say that he's not going to turn into the next, John Riggins or anything. The offensive line in DC is dreadful in pass blocking. Wes Schweitzer, Brandon Scherf, and Jaron Christian are terrible pass blockers. They're good run blockers, but terrible pass blockers. I understand why Ron Rivera made this change. He's been given a lot of say in that organization. He didn't draft Haskins. He really has no connection to him. And he does have a history with Kyle Allen. Kyle Allen had moments when they were both with the Panthers when it looked like he could be a really good player. And I don't think there's a question that Allen's going to come in and hold his own. He won't be great, but he won't be terrible. I don't think this is the end of the line for Haskins. It wouldn't surprise me at all if he got another shot. The Patriots need a quarterback of the future. They could do a lot worse than trading for Haskins. The Bears need a quarterback of the future. They could trade for Haskins. Maybe the Buccaneers to let Haskins learn behind Tom Brady. And you have a sort of competition for Buccaneers quarterback of the future between him and Rosen. I understand it looks bleak right now for Haskins, but he wasn't put in a great position in D.C. He has talent. There's no question about that. Realistically, he only had one terrible game this year, and that was against the Browns. I understand that he hasn't looked great. He locks on too much to his primary target. He just doesn't make the proper reads. But that is something that can be coached. There's no question in my mind that in the next year or two, Haskins will get another chance as a starting quarterback. The last story to talk about concerns Mike Purcell signing an extension with the Broncos for 3 years at $14.8 million. And this is a great story. He started with the 49ers and really didn't do much. He didn't play a snap in the NFL in 2017 and 2018. In fact, he spent some time in the AAF. Remember that? Then the Broncos give him a chance, and he plays great. 78.4 overall grade according to Pro Football Focus last year. This year it's taken a little bit of a dip, 62.9, but that's still solid. The contract is fair for him. It's just under $5 million a year. I don't mind that at all. I like that the Broncos are rewarding someone who worked his tail off to get to where he is. This is a good move for Denver. Alright, here's my interview with Paul Knepper. You're listening to the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and I'm fortunate enough to be joined by Paul Knepper, the author of the Knicks of the 90s, Ewing, Oakley, Starks, and the Brawlers that almost won it all. Paul, how are you?
I'm doing well, Jacob. Thanks for having me on.
No, my pleasure. First, I just want to say this. I am a Nets fan. I am a huge Nets fan. I despise the Knicks with a burning passion, so you have no idea the hell that I'm going to go through to conduct this interview with you. I hope that you appreciate it, Paul. I hope the listener appreciates it, because this is hell for me.
Wow. Well, I do appreciate it, and I understand the hard feelings.
Nothing personal.
Of course.
So, in the first ever NBA draft lottery in 1985, the Knicks got the first overall pick, which resulted in them winning the Patrick Ewing sweepstakes, and the Pacers got the second overall pick, which resulted in them taking Wayman Tisdale. While Tisdale had a good career, obviously, he was no Ewing. How different would history have been if the Pacers had gotten first overall and the Knicks had gotten second overall?
Wow, that's a great question. Obviously, it would have completely changed the trajectory of those two franchises and the NBA as a whole, right? Who knows how it plays out? I mean, they probably maybe the Pacers are better after that. They don't get Reggie Miller a couple years later. I don't know. That's a great what if. It could go a number of different ways, but clearly those two franchises would be very different. And I think 1990s basketball in general During that time period, the Pacers and the Knicks were kind of mainstays at the top of the Eastern Conference, and so really, I think the Eastern Conference and consequently the NBA as a whole would have looked very different.
Odds are that if Ewing had been a Pacer, they wouldn't have been in position to take Reggie Miller. But could you imagine Ewing and Miller on the same team? Oh my God!
No, yeah, it's crazy. That would have been crazy. There was a lot of talk of that in 1996 when Reggie was a free agent, and there was a lot of talk about the Knicks pursuing him, and ultimately Allen Houston was their first choice. But yeah, that he would have been, really those early 90s to mid 90s. The one thing that the Knicks desperately missed was a consistent second scorer to go along with Patrick, and Reggie certainly would have been that guy, whether it was, Reggie and Patrick in New York or Reggie and Patrick in Indiana. That would have been a pretty deadly combination.
Yeah, I'm with you there 100%. In my circle of friends, and not just the Nets fans that I'm friends with, the Knicks fans. I have more Knicks fan friends than Nets fan friends, ironically. Ewing is kind of I don't want to say controversial figure, but he's not remembered as fondly as I'd expect him to be. He's regarded, at least in my circle, as a guy who was great, don't get me wrong, but his team's just always perennially underachieved. I know someone who doesn't even like talking about the 90s Knicks because he just has that image of Ewing missing the finger roll in Game 7 of 95. Why do you think there are some Knicks fans that don't remember Ewing as fondly as they should?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think that's a very real issue. I think it's a few things that, you touched on that, the first lottery in 1985. I think, younger people, younger generations don't know what a big deal it was, what a big deal Patrick Ewing was coming out of college. I mean, he was, a lot of people said he was the next Bill Russell. He was probably the biggest prospect to enter the league since Kareem Abdul-Jabbar years earlier. And so I think there was a perception that whoever won the lottery was going to win multiple championships with Patrick Ewing. And, of course, that didn't pan out. So I think kind of the shadow of expectation that he entered the league with always kind of stuck with him. I think he wasn't – I think his personality hurt his image somewhat. I refer to him in the book as the reluctant superstar. He wasn't another player from that era. Charles Barkley loved the media. He loved the spotlight. Patrick wasn't like that at all, and at times was standoffish to the media and the fans, and I think that hurt his image somewhat. And then, I think there was a lot of disappointment in the 90s. I think Knicks fans loved those teams. They provided a lot of great, happy moments and memories, but ultimately they didn't get over the top. And I think Patrick probably shoulders an unfair amount of blame for that.
I'm curious as to what the mood was after Ewing blew the finger roll in Game 7 of 95. Were you there? Can you lay it out? How about that?
I wasn't there, but I've talked to people. I talked to a lot of guys from the team about it. They were pretty crushed. They were pretty crushed. There was a sense that maybe this was the end of the line for that unit too. In addition to it being a devastating loss, it was okay. We've kind of run the course with this group of Ewing, Starks, Oakley, Mason. They came within a game of the championship in '94, but there was a feeling that maybe there were going to be changes, and they were. The biggest being that Pat Riley left.
One final question on Ewing, and then we'll move on. But I feel like it's really important to spend a sizable amount of time on Ewing because he was the best player on those teams.
Sure.
How devastating was the injury caused by Andrew Lang? Why did it have the effect on Ewing that it had?
It was devastating. The Knicks surgeon said he described it as a very unusual basketball injury. It's actually a lot more common in football, and it was to the point that his wrist, the bone was nearly protruding out of the skin. So it was it wasn't your typical break. It was a severe fracture of his wrist. And it just, when it initially happened, they said this could be career-ending. It's that bad. And so he was concerned about that. And in a way, that was the beginning of the end for Patrick. He did eventually come back from the wrist thing, but after that, the following season, it was his Achilles was a problem, and that was a lingering condition. And it was that I think that wrist thing was kind of the start of his body beginning to break down.
All right, so moving on from Ewing, what's something that most people don't know about Charles Oakley?
So Charles Oakley, to me, is probably the most fascinating character in the book. And I talked to close to 100 people for the book, and I think every single one of them had a Charles Oakley story. It won't surprise most people to know that 70% of those stories were about what a tough, physical, scary guy he was. But maybe 30% of those stories were about what a kind, generous, loving guy he was. Multiple people used the word sweetheart to me to describe Charles Oakley, which certainly goes contrary to his image.
I was going to say.
Yeah, so that's, he did a lot of, he was a great teammate, not just in the locker room and on the court, but he used to organize team-building activities. He would have the guys over to his house, and he personally would cook dinner for everybody. He did a lot of little things. There's a guy named Steve Masiello, who's now the coach at Manhattan College, was a ball boy for the Knicks in the late 80s, early 90s. And when he had his 8th grade dance, Oakley gave Masiello his car along with a driver to drive him and his date to the dance.
Wow.
So he did a lot. There were a lot of stories like that, just like kind, generous, big-hearted gestures by Oak that people don't really know about.
And now he's a pariah at Madison Square Garden. James Dolan hates him. He hates Dolan. It's so sad. Even as a Knicks hater, which I am, it breaks my heart to see the relationship or the lack of a relationship that Oakley has with the Garden. I'm sure it breaks your heart too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I would, the past, and you may have taken some pleasure in this, but the past 20 years really have been
very much
miserable.
so. Very much so, Paul. No one was happier than me when Durant and Kyrie burned the Knicks for the Nets.
Sure,
sure.
So it's been there have been a lot of low points in the last couple decades. For me, I think seeing Charles Oakley get thrown out of Madison Square Garden was the lowest. That was
Now this new generation of Knicks fans that's growing up, they don't remember Oakley as the bruiser inside and the really good player that he was. They remember him as the guy who got thrown out of Madison Square Garden. It's so unfair.
Yeah, he did so much for that franchise for a long time. It's a real shame.
Is there any truth to the rumor that him and Ewing didn't get along?
No, I don't think that's true. I think a couple things. I think They got along. They were friends. They weren't close friends. So as it was explained to me by someone, for example, they never went out to lunch or dinner just the two of them. They went out to lunch or dinner many times, like with groups of guys, but they never really socialized just the two of them. And, of course, they played together in New York for 10 years and were co-captains for a long time. So I think that's noteworthy. But there was definitely mutual respect there. They liked each other. I think there was, a few people I talked to, I got the impression there was a little jealousy on Oak's behalf. I think, it was just, Oak was a co-captain with Ewing. He worked as hard as Ewing. He practiced as hard. He wanted to win just as much. But, Ewing was the marquee name. Ewing got all the shots. Ewing got a lot more money than Oak did. And so, when the reporters came to the locker room, the first person they went to talk to was Ewing. And so I think there was a little jealousy there. The other thing is that, and Oak told me this personally, Oak is furious at Patrick for not publicly supporting him after the incident at the Garden. He was deeply hurt by that Patrick didn't come to his defense. And so he said a few comments in the past couple of years, derogatory comments about Patrick during Patrick's playing days. And I think that has to be viewed within the context of how upset he is at Patrick right now about what happened.
No, I think that's fair. I don't blame Oakley for being upset for 1 minute. So moving on to the other guy who's mentioned by name in the title of the book, John Starks is fondly remembered by Knicks fans because he had to work his tail off to become a really good NBA player. I mean, at one point he was bagging groceries, was out of the NBA, the Knicks give him a shot, and he parlayed it into a really good career. However, he had moments that made you want to kill him, whether it was headbutting Reggie Miller in Game 3 of the 93 Eastern Conference quarterfinals, getting his shot blocked by Hakeem Olajuwon late in Game 6 of the 94 NBA Finals, following that up with one of the worst games in NBA history, and missing 2 late free throws after Miller scored 8 points in 9 seconds, one of the greatest moments of my life. He was a maddening player. Is it fair to say that Starks didn't have that quote-unquote clutch gene?
I don't think that's fair. I wouldn't say that. I think Starks was I think he was just a very streaky shooter.
Okay.
Of course you look at, the biggest game of his career, he shot 2 for 18, and, you could say he choked or, I don't like that word, but he clearly, wasn't himself mentally or psyched himself out or whatever you want to do, it tightened up. That's a fact. But,
well, the bad thing about that game, anyone can be off for a given night. He kept taking shots. Pass the ball, for the love of God.
Yeah. I mean,
it's okay if you don't have it that given night, but get it to Ewing, get it to Oakley, get it to Mason, get it to someone. I mean, my God. Why was Reggie Miller so effective in getting to him?
Well, Reggie was. I don't know if you've seen they did a 30 for 30 on ESPN called Winning Time.
Are you kidding me? I watched it last night in preparation of talking to you.
Okay, great. In that, I love it. In that film, I don't recall, but Reggie's sister Cheryl, the great Cheryl Miller, said that her brother is a maddening human being. He can drive you crazy. That's his personality. I don't know if you remember that. There's a clip of Michael Jordan basically trying to claw Reggie's face off.
Right.
He got under Jordan's skin. So that was, Reggie was one of the great talkers, and he knew how to get under people's skin. And Starks was very temperamental, and he was very emotional, and so he was kind of the perfect mark for Reggie. And of course, those games, they played each other in the playoffs several times, and so high-stake matchups with a lot of emotion involved, and Reggie knew how to exploit Starks' emotion.
Talking to Paul Knepper, the author of the Knicks of the 90s, Ewing, Oakley, Starks, and the Brawlers that almost won it all. So, was Pat Riley the right coach to max out the talent that the Knicks had, or did they need someone else to get them back to the mountaintop?
I think he was the right coach. I think he got the most out of those teams. I think the problem, frankly, was they didn't have enough talent.
Okay.
You know, they had guys. I think guys like Starks and Mason and Oak. They kind of got the most out of their abilities. But yeah, I don't. You know, you look at most championship teams. Most championship teams have multiple Hall of Famers, right? Those Knicks teams under Riley, they just didn't. It was Ewing, and then, you know, Oakley was a very nice player, and Starks was a very nice player, but they weren't Hall of Fame caliber players. And
No, definitely not.
I think it's actually a great testament to Riley that he got that team to Game 7 of the NBA Finals. I don't think many coaches would have been able to do that.
No, I agree with you. That's just another question that someone had in my circle of friends. So, can you tell us some stories about Anthony Mason's pranks?
Sure. Unfortunately, a lot of Anthony Mason's pranks were R-rated, and his teammates were unwilling to open up about a lot of them. But he did smaller things. I mean, goofy things, childish things, just like, you know, when Pat Riley was talking to a player or chewing out a player, Mason would stand behind Riley and make funny faces over his shoulder. You know, the kind of thing you might do in third grade. You know, he had when one of the ball boys started with the Knicks, Mason instructed him to turn on all the showers as practice was ending, and he instructed him to do so in a way that the ball boy would be stuck in the showers. Like he basically closed himself in, so he had to get wet while he was coming out. So he did a lot of childish pranks like that, and then there were more, again, childish, but often involving his genitals and things like that, which the guys didn't want to get into in great detail, understandably so.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was often dirtier versions of childish pranks.
Let me ask you this. When I first read, because I did read your website that you have in conjunction with the book. I don't remember the title off the top of my head. What's the website called again?
It's called The Knicks of the 90s.
The Knicks of the 90s. Right. Yeah, I did go on that website, and when I saw that Mason was a prankster, it surprised me because, you know, he was a rough and tumble guy, wasn't afraid to throw a few elbows, wasn't afraid to get into a scuffle here and there. Did that surprise you that he was a prankster?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Because he was very serious, and he was, I would say, quite surly. He was very often in a bad mood and annoyed with somebody or something. So yeah, it did surprise me.
So Reggie Miller's 8 points in 9 seconds is a fantastic moment if you're a Knicks hater. But there's a better moment for us Knicks haters, the Charles Smith Memorial. Would you be able to describe what exactly happened with him in Game 5 of the 93 Eastern Conference Finals against the Bulls?
Oh, man. Yeah, I mean, you know, he's a 6'10" guy who had the ball a few feet from the basket, and he got rejected 4 times in about 5 seconds by the Bulls. And man, the Knicks were down 1 at that point. It's Game 5 of the Eastern Conference Finals, and the Knicks had home court advantage. They were the number 1 seed, and so if they had pulled that game out, if he was able to convert on that and they pulled that game out, they would have been looking at worst case scenario, a Game 7 in Madison Square Garden. And a lot of, you know, some people I talked to thought that team was even better than the Knicks team that went to the finals the next year. And
it
so
very well could have been.
Yeah, it was a devastating blow. You know, a few things in Charles's defense. You're talking about 3. I mean, he got rejected by Scottie Pippen, Michael Jordan, and Horace Grant, 3 of the best defenders in the game. Right. The other thing is, you know, there were a lot of things that led up to that. One, that play was a pick and roll for Starks and Ewing, and Starks passed to Ewing, and Ewing basically just tripped over his own feet and lost the ball. and Smith recovered it and then got rejected. But the play was called for Ewing, and he didn't deliver. The other thing is the Knicks shot 20 for 35 from the foul line that game. They missed 15 free throws. If they would have shot, say, their normal percentage from the free throw line, it never would have come down to Charles Smith. So yeah, Charles Smith. The imagery of that is ingrained in the heads of Knicks fans like myself and Knicks haters like yourself. But there were other reasons that I lost that game.
Talking to Paul Knepper, the author of the Knicks of the 90s, Ewing, Oakley, Starks, and the Brawlers that almost won it all. So how much of the playoff success that the 94 Knicks had do you attribute to the fact that Michael Jordan spent that season as a Birmingham Baron? I think it accounts for a lot of it, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't argue with that. They met the Bulls in the second round, and the Bulls took them to 7 games, and Game 5 was another questionable call that the Knicks came out on the lucky side of. Right. Time. But yeah, so they, that Bulls team won 55 games. They were actually a really good team without Michael. So yeah, sure, man. I don't see any way that the Knicks beat them that year if Michael was there.
Good. I'm glad to hear you say that. When I brought that up in my circle of friends, they said, "Oh, Jacob, you're crazy. What are you talking about?" I'm glad to hear you say that, Paul. I'll play this for him.
Yeah.
So let's move over to the Jeff Van Gundy era. What did the Knicks see in him to keep him around as an assistant coach until they finally made him head coach?
Yeah, I mean, Riley was a big fan of his. And I think the things that impressed him the most were Van Gundy's intelligence, his understanding of the game, his work ethic, and his attention to detail. And so Riley loved Van Gundy. In fact, when Riley left for Miami, he tried to bring Van Gundy with him. And Dave Checketts, the Knicks president, it was a very acrimonious breakup between Riley and the Knicks, and there was no way in the world he was letting Van Gundy out of his contract to go work for Riley. So that didn't, never panned out. But Van Gundy was a guy who I think a lot of people underestimated along the way. Even when they hired him, they had brought in Don Nelson briefly after Riley left, and that kind of was a disaster. He didn't even make it the full season. When Dave Checketts told me when they promoted Van Gundy to head coach, Checketts said he didn't even consider the possibility that Van Gundy was going to stay on full time. He viewed him purely as a stopgap until the end of the season, at which point they would bring in a big name guy. But Van Gundy won Checketts over as he did just about everybody he worked with or for over the next several years.
What was going through Van Gundy's mind when he was holding on to Alonzo Mourning's leg for dear life?
Talking about great images, right?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite moments ever.
Yeah, it's incredible. And here's a guy who, Van Gundy had a lot of success with the Knicks. He had some successful years with the Rockets.
I wanted him on the Nets. I didn't want Steve Nash. I wanted Jeff Van Gundy.
Yeah, I don't blame you. And has moved on to a great second career as a broadcaster. But the defining image of his NBA career is of hanging from Alonzo Mourning's leg.
Oh God!
And I asked Van Gundy about it, and he says he has no recollection of it.
Really?
He said he ran into the scrum, which he now believes is a mistake, but he ran in to try and break it up and separate the guys, and he was caught somewhat by a glancing blow from Larry Johnson, and so he says he was kind of dazed and doesn't recall the seconds after that, and he thinks he got knocked to the ground and was just kind of grabbed onto the nearest thing for dear life.
I mean, look, I don't begrudge a head coach for running in to try to break up a fight. I was at the Nets game 4 against the Sixers when Jimmy Butler and some other net, I don't remember who it was off the top of my head, got into a little bit of a shoving match, and Kenny Atkinson came running out, Brett Brown came running out, Jacques Vaughn came running out and actually fell flat on his face right in front of me. That's a true story.
Wow.
And, yeah, I don't begrudge coaches for running out, but you've got to know when discretion's the better part of valor.
Yeah.
So how big a deal was it when the Knicks signed Allen Houston away from the Pistons?
It was big. I mean, I think from the Knicks standpoint, it was part of a bigger offseason. Really in the course of 24 to 48 hours, they traded Anthony Mason for Larry Johnson. They signed Allen Houston, and they signed Chris Childs, and they thought, it was a tremendous offseason for them, that they kind of completely rebooted their roster on the fly, kind of rebuilt on the fly. And I think Houston was the most coveted of the three for his shooting ability because, I think, like I said earlier, I think really in the Riley years, they didn't have that. They were really missing a consistent second scorer and just a great shooter in general. They tried a couple times. They traded for Rondo Blackman, hoping he could be that guy, and he was really towards the end of his career, didn't have much left. And they drafted Hubert Davis, hoping he could be that guy. And Hubert was a very good shooter, but didn't give you much else, and so he never really got starter type minutes. And so Houston was that elite shooter that they desperately needed for a long time.
And he's also the last big free agent signing that the Knicks have had, if you don't count Amari Stoudemire.
That's crazy. I never thought about it in those terms, but you're right, and that was 24 years ago.
Isn't that crazy? It's why I keep saying to my friends, I said for the longest time, and I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but I just want to say this. I said for the longest time that the Knicks weren't going to get a big free agent last offseason. I didn't say that Durant and Kyrie were going to go to the Nets. I just said the Knicks weren't going to get one. The reason I said that was because the Knicks were perennial losers. They had no reason for anyone to want to come. Playing at Madison Square Garden, who the hell cares? Knicks haven't been relevant for 20 years. Until the Knicks can develop a young core capable of getting into the playoffs, I don't care if they get swept, get into the playoffs, then stars will come. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, and I'd say even on a broader scale, yes, they need that core, but just they need they need to be a functional organization.
Right.
I know that's a very generic term, but
you're not wrong.
They've just been dysfunctional for a long time. There's constant turnover of players and coaches and general managers and presidents, and constant bad decisions, personnel-wise, and embarrassments off the court. And yeah, I mean, in the NBA,
you give away Kristaps Porzingis to open up 2 max free agent slots. You fill it with Julius Randle and Marcus freaking Morris. I mean, come on.
Yeah, terrible. It was a terrible move, and that's another thing too, that their last 2 stars, and you could debate how much, whether you want to call Kristaps a star or not.
I think he's a star. I love that duo of Luke and Porzingis.
Yeah, he certainly has star potential at the very least. And their last 2 stars, I mean, the way that I'm not a huge Carmelo Anthony fan, but the way that his tenure ended in New York was terrible.
Yeah.
the way he was treated was terrible. And, this guy, other stars see that. He's friends with other stars. His best friends are LeBron James and Chris Paul and Dwayne Wade, and those guys are older now, but the younger guys know. And then the Kristaps thing was handled so poorly. So just on so many levels, that it's just been complete dysfunction. And, you look at the Nets, and really since Sean Marks has done a great job there. And
Former
the last
Knicks.
several years, they've been a very well-run organization. And
that
get
trade.
Go ahead. I think there's something to Madison Square Garden. I do, but think of it in terms of any other job, any other career, right? There's maximum salaries in the NBA, so it's not like the Knicks can pay them more than other teams. So
right.
if you're going to get the same money there anywhere, then you're going to look at other factors. And if you're looking for a job, I don't care if you're a lawyer or a teacher or a businessman. If you have several options on the table, you're not going to go to the company that has been terribly run for many years. It just doesn't make any sense. It's a bad decision.
I'm with you. I'm with you 100%. I couldn't have said it better myself. Stephen A. Smith said that the Knicks, and I don't really like Stephen A. Smith that much, but he said something that I 100% agree with. He said that the Knicks should retire Carmelo Anthony's number because he's the only superstar that actually wanted to be a Knick. I got to tell you, I understand that logic.
Yeah, I get that too. I'm a little on the fence about whether they should or not, but I certainly understand that argument.
Talking to Paul Knepper, the author of the Knicks of the 90s, Ewing, Oakley, Starks, and the Brawlers that almost won it all. So we touched on it a little bit with Van Gundy, but I'd like you to get into it a little bit more. What caused the feud between Larry Johnson and Alonzo Mourning?
Yeah, that's a kind of $1 million question, and I feel a little empty that I didn't get a definitive answer to that. A lot of people, there are a lot of people who are pretty confident, people who were with them together in Charlotte, as well as people who played with Larry in New York and Alonzo in Miami, that it was an ego thing. It was who's the man, who's going to be the man in Charlotte, and it started really right after Alonzo got there. Larry Johnson wasn't very nice to him. He made a lot of statements to the effect that this is my team, and then the Hornets gave Johnson that enormous contract, which actually angered Alonzo very much because he knew it was a small market team, and if they were paying Larry Johnson that much, he thought he wasn't going to get paid as much. And so it was a real ego thing. Who's going to be the guy who's going to take the last shot? That was real. There's been a lot of speculation over the years that there was more to it. There were rumors that there was a woman involved, and those rumors persist. Both of those guys have denied it. I found one guy, Tim Hardaway, I asked about it. And he and Alonzo were close when they were in Miami. And I asked him, I think I said, do you know what the beef was between Alonzo and Larry Johnson? And he started chuckling. And he said, I do, but I can't tell you. And that was the only indication I got anywhere that there was perhaps something more to it. But I don't know. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to ascertain whether there is or isn't. It's one of those things where people will always speculate that there was more to it, that there was a woman involved, that there was some sexy story, but I'm inclined to believe it was probably just, maybe Hardaway was talking about, I don't know, something specific that was said between the two of them or a specific fight that they had. But everything I've heard and it points to it just being an ego thing. I compare it to, I just read a great book, Jeff Pearlman's new book called Three Ring Circus about the Shaq and Kobe Lakers and kind of how much they didn't get along and how much of a dispute there was over who was the guy, who was the number one guy with the Lakers. And I compare it to that. I think they both there were a couple of tough alpha males who both wanted to be the man.
Follow-up question. Who came up with the idea of those Converse commercials where Larry Johnson dressed up as a grandmother?
There's actually a very good story behind that. The Grandmama commercials, which were great. So Larry saw him at Converse, and Converse said to him, they pitched him an idea for a commercial. He was going to do a commercial with Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. It was going to be Larry Johnson, Magic Johnson, and Larry Bird. And the idea behind the commercial was Larry Bird and Magic Johnson were going to be like doctors in a laboratory, like think of like Dr. Frankenstein. And
when they combined the first name Larry with the last name Johnson?
Yeah.
Okay.
They were going to create the perfect basketball player. And they were going to debate, we should name Larry, and we should name Larry Bird, we should name Magic Johnson, and we're going to name Larry Johnson. And Larry Johnson signed up for that, thought that was the deal, basically showed up for the shoot, and was told that one of the guys, Magic or Bird, he wasn't told which one, but one of them backed out. They scrapped the idea, and they told him, you're going to put on a dress and be a grandma.
And he was down for it.
Yeah, and it ended up being a great ad campaign for him, I think.
I mean, if Dennis Rodman can dress up in a wedding dress, Larry Johnson could be a grandmother.
Yeah, sure.
So, can you describe the brawl that happened in Game 5 of the 1997 Eastern Conference semifinals against the Heat, and how it ultimately led to the Knicks blowing that 3-1 series lead? Another great moment for a Knicks hater.
Yeah, sure.
There is some bias here, Paul. I'm not going to lie to you.
I appreciate you being honest about it. So it's Game 5. The Knicks are up 3-1 in the series, and it's Game 5, and in the closing seconds, Miami has the game wrapped up. It's pretty much over. In fact, most of the starters are on the bench already, and in the closing, Tim Hardaway shooting a foul shot in the closing seconds, and Charlie Ward goes to box out P.J. Brown, and he goes pretty low on him. He goes at his knees, and P.J. didn't like that. P.J. is about 6'10", 6'11". Charlie Ward is 6'1", maybe, and P.J. picked up Charlie Brown. I was about to say Charlie Brown.
Charlie Brown. That's like the Magic. That's like the Magic and Bird commercial. You can find two names.
Yeah, Charlie Brown. So PJ picks up Charlie Ward, flips him over into the stands. Ward comes out, and he and John Wallace from the Knicks tackle PJ Brown, and it turns into a bench clearing brawl. And this is very shortly after the NBA instituted a rule that anyone who comes off the bench when there's a fight gets an automatic suspension. So because the game was already in hand, the Knicks starters were on the bench. A number of them came off the bench, whereas had they been on the court in a close game, they wouldn't have been suspended necessarily. So it was, Starks, Larry Johnson, Ewing. Ewing was the big one. They all came on. They were all suspended. None of the Heat players left their bench. A couple reasons for that. One, the brawl took place on the Knicks side of the court, so it was like right across from the Knicks bench. And I think I actually talked to Stan Van Gundy, and Stan Van Gundy said to me, he of course was an assistant coach for the Heat then. He said if the brawl had
I forgot about that. You're right.
Yeah, he said if the brawl had taken place on the Miami side of the court, it would have been the Miami bench that came off and been suspended. The other thing is just by circumstance, a couple of referees happened to be very close to the Miami bench and helped keep those guys back. So the Knicks, they were suspended. The Knicks appealed the suspension. It actually went to a judge in New York, and he ruled that, it was proper. It was in it, the NBA followed the letter of the law, and the Knicks, they played games 6 and 7 severely shorthanded, and of course were eliminated. And it was devastating for them because they thought that was a great team. A lot of the guys, Gunny believes it was the best team in the years that he was head coach there. Starch told me it was the best offensive team he played on in his whole tenure in New York. They were deep at every position. It was a very good team. It was also really the last year that Patrick was healthy, and so they all view that as a missed opportunity.
But they did get their revenge on the Heat a couple years later when they beat him as the 8th seed en route to making the NBA Finals.
Yeah, they actually beat them the next 3 years. They beat them in a
Oh, is that right? I
game.
didn't remember that.
Yeah, 98, 99, 2000. They beat them all 3 years in a deciding game in Miami.
Ooh, talk about comeuppance.
Yeah.
So, would you be able to tell us something that most people don't know about Latrell Sprewell? And him choking P.J. Carlesimo when they were with the Warriors doesn't count.
Yeah, I think most people know about that.
Definitely.
Spree was, is a very intelligent guy, by all accounts. Rick Brunson, he's very close with. Brunson was like a 12th man on the Knicks for a couple of years in the late 90s, and he and Spree remained very close. And he said to me, "Spreewell's a nerd." I'm like, "What do you mean he's a nerd?" He goes, "He's a nerd. He's like a computer nerd." And it was funny because he sounded like an old stereotypical jock, but Sprewell loves electronics. And he loves cars, and he's kind of like, based on people I've talked to, he's almost like a savant at taking apart. He loves to take apart electronics, stereos, computers, cars, takes them apart and puts them back together again. He loves it.
Huh.
Yeah, that's just like his passion, and he's like super up to date on all electronics and whatever is new on the market, and
interesting.
I don't know. Yeah, he's like he should be working like in the Apple Store or for Best Buy or something like that.
I actually have a funny Latrell Sprewell story. Would you like to hear my funny Latrell Sprewell story?
Absolutely.
Okay, so when I was first getting into sports, I was like 4 or 5 years old at this time. I hadn't picked a basketball team. I picked the Nets because they were good. They had Jason Kidd, Richard Jefferson, Kerry Kittles, Keith Van Horn. Those were my guys.
Right.
But there was a time when I didn't hate the Knicks, and I wanted a Latrell Sprewell bobblehead. My father bought me a Latrell Sprewell bobblehead, and I had it in my room for a little while.
Right.
It wasn't until I realized that deep down in my soul, I despised the Knicks with a burning passion, that I actually twisted the head off the bobblehead, and it ended up in the garbage. That's a true story.
Wow, almost like Sprewell tried to twist the head off of P.J. Carlesimo.
I never thought of that. that was my revenge because I liked Carlesimo when he was an interim Nets coach.
Yeah, he coached for the Nets, right? Yeah.
Yeah, interim Nets coach, took over for Avery Johnson their first year in Brooklyn. Then they lost to the Bulls. Stupid Nate Robinson, former Knick, always hated him.
By the way, I have to say I'm clearly older than you. I go back a little further. I loved the Nets in the Drazen years.
Okay.
I like the Nets, like the Drazen and Kenny Anderson and Derek Coleman. There were a couple years where those teams were so fun to watch.
Yep.
And they had great announcers. It was Bill Raftery was doing the Nets games back then with Spencer Ross. And I was a Knicks fan, of course. There wasn't a rivalry per se because back then the Nets had just been bad for a really long time, and it was just never.
Tell me about it.
It wasn't like it wasn't like it wasn't like rooting for the Yankees and the Red Sox or or something like that. Like you could. the Knicks were my guys, but I'm a huge basketball fan, and so I tuned into the Nets a lot, and the Nets were a lot more fun than the Knicks. They were a really fun team.
One of my friends, and they had great jerseys too. One of my friends, Eric, asked me with a straight face, did the Nets and Knicks have a rivalry before, they got Durant and Kyrie? And I looked at him like, are you nuts? Like, that was such an offensive question to me. I know he didn't mean it as offensive, and I love Eric to death. I really do. But it ticked me off because it was almost like, because Knicks fans have this complex of, we're the little brother. We're always the little brother. And we've heard it our whole lives. Eric saying that, it just fed into this notion that the Knicks didn't care about the Nets. They were the fly on the windshield. Again, love Eric to death, but that comment just ticked me off.
That's funny.
Talking to Paul Knepper, the author of the Knicks of the 90s, Ewing, Oakley, Starks, and the Brawlers that almost won it all. So this question comes from my buddy Nick, and this is a great question. In the latter part of the 1990s, why did the Knicks keep having terrible drafts?
Oh, boy. Wow. I don't know that they had that many terrible drafts.
96 was rough.
Yeah, because 96, they had three picks in 96.
Right.
And 96, of course, is one of the greatest drafts in league history. You have Kobe and Iverson and Nash and Ray Allen and on and on. There's
Derek Fisher, Rogowskis, Roy Rogers.
Ton of guys in that draft. They missed somewhat. Most of those top guys went before then. I know Ernie Grunfeld, who was the Knicks GM at the time, actually tried really hard to package a couple of them because they had, it was like 18, 19, and 21. I might be a little off, but they had 3 first-round picks, like 18th, 19th, and 21. And he tried to package. No,
you got it exactly.
Oh, great. It's hard to keep track of all that stuff sometimes. Thank you. He tried to package a couple to get up to like the number, like he tried to package like 19 and 21 or 18 and 19 to get up to like the number 10 range, and wasn't able to. And so they did. They missed in that draft. And of course the big one was 99 with Frederick Weiss.
Yeah,
that's one that they never lived down. Of course, Frederick Weiss is best known for Vince Carter jumping over him in the Olympics. And the
next pick, Ron Artest.
Yeah, the next pick was Ron Artest, and I talked to I talked to guys that were in the room on draft night. Ed Tapscott was making the pick then. He was then an interim general manager, and
that's right. That was before Layden. I forgot about that.
Yeah. So what happened was the year that the Knicks went to the finals in '99, they, of course, as you mentioned before, they got in as the 8th seed. It was a really weird season. It was a lockout-shortened season, and they had a lot of new players. They traded for Sprewell and Camby, and they got rid of Starks and Oakley. Ewing was in and out of the lineup with his Achilles. There was a whole bunch of stuff going on, and at one point they were 21-21, and by all accounts were seriously underachieving, and the Knicks fired Ernie Grunfeld as general manager and made Ed Tapscott the interim general manager. And come draft night, there were a lot of guys in the room pushing hard for Ron Artest. Ron Artest was the local kid, of course. He grew up in Queens. He played ball at St. John's. The Knicks fans certainly wanted Artest. And this is back when '99 still, you didn't have that many foreign players in the league, so there was kind of a perception about European players that they were soft and just not as good, and so everyone was really shocked when they took him. A lot of guys, as I said, a number of the scouts, people in the front office liked Artest. There were some that had major questions about him as well. And a quick story about that, Artest was supposed to work out for the Knicks, and he didn't show up. And He was supposed to work out that day against James Posey. James Posey, earlier for another team, Artest and Posey worked out together, and Posey just kicked his butt all over the floor, crushed him in the workout. And the Knicks front office believed that Artest didn't show up because he was afraid of Posey. I mean, I think he called and said he had a stomach ache or something. And they referred to it as the James Posey flu. Artest has since said, just a few years ago, he said that he was terribly hungover that morning, and that's why he couldn't play. But either way, there were people who were skeptical about Artest. That being said, most of the people in the room were pushing Tapscott to take Artest. Tapscott's belief was that Tapscott was in the room in that 96 draft and very much wanted Zydrunas Ilgauskas with one of those picks. And the Knicks didn't take him. He thought it was a big mistake. It turned out to be a mistake. And Tapscott believed that Frederick Weiss reminded him a lot of Ilgauskas. And
well, both foreign big men. I could see it, I guess.
Yeah, he reminded him a lot of Ilgauskas. And on top of that, Ewing was 36 years old and had just partially torn his Achilles. So he was looking at like, well, we need a center going forward, and I really like this guy, and so he pulled the trigger on against the advice of most of the people in the room. He pulled the trigger on Weiss.
All right, Paul, I'll get you out on this. In hindsight, who do you think those teams needed to get over the hump and win a title?
I think part of it, kind of the tragedy, one of the tragedies of Patrick's career, I hate to use the word tragedy because it's not the right word. He had a magnificent career, made a ridiculous amount of money, is in the Hall of Fame. He's fine.
And should have been Knicks head coach.
Yeah, probably.
I say that.
One of the shames of Patrick's career is that when he finally had the pieces around him to win a championship, his body broke down. I think really like that 99 team, he had the scoring. I mean, he never had the consistent scoring. If he had an Allen Houston earlier in his early years, a player like that, ideally, I think Starks would have been best suited as a sixth man because he was so streaky and he could disappear at times. And so you needed somebody who could knock down that shot consistently and create his own shot a little bit. The Knicks had talked in the early 90s a little bit with Sacramento about trading for Mitch Richmond. That's a guy, if you want a specific guy, like he could have been the missing piece. The problem was they wanted, a significant amount back. So, but if you could have gotten a guy like that for free, for example, if you could have plugged in like a Mitch Richmond, he's a guy who, like look at the 94 finals. If you had the same Knicks teams plus a Mitch Richmond, I think that team wins the championship.
I agree with you. I didn't know that about Richmond, but I like Richmond a lot. I actually have a Run TMC picture up in my room. Yeah, I could see cool. that. I could see that. All right, Paul, thank you very much for your time.
Sure. Thank you so much, Jacob. I really enjoyed it.
All right. That was Paul Knepper. His book is The Knicks of the 90s, Ewing, Oakley, Starks, and the Brawlers that almost won it all. Thanks for listening. Here comes the outro. Thanks for the plug, Jacob from the past. It does mean a lot. Until tomorrow, I am Jacob Valk saying that I'm gonna run with the devil in Panama.